Well, welcome to WMHT's conversation around the future of work. What will the future of work look like? Many say it's determined right now. From focused attention on how to best prepare for the changing nature of the workplace and workforce, to the impact of the pandemic. Readying workers of all ages with new skills and pinpointing areas of growth within the workforce. Important changes around equity and inclusion, and something that benefits every worker, creating quality jobs that provide a chance for all to succeed and and participate in the workforce to their fullest potential. Convening local experts, our discussion will focus around the big picture questions that ultimately are decided in the day-to-day details and decision-making around policy, funding, partnerships, collaboration, and change. Our panelists include Brian Williams, Executive Director with Capital Region Workforce Development Board, Michael C. Ryder, President and CEO of the New York Alliance for Inclusion and Innovation, Melinda Mack, Executive Director with New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals, Dr. Gladys Cruz, District Superintendent with Questar III BOCES, Vice President of Policy with PHI National, Robert Espinoza. Welcome, everyone. WMHT welcomes you to the conversation, and let's get started. Let's dive into how the future of work is happening now. So first question, how is the way we are thinking about work changing?
I'm happy to go first, and I'm sure my colleagues have lots to say as well. So I think the future of work is always changing. It's just happening a lot faster than it did previously. So, I mean, if you think back to 30 years ago when technology was sort of overtaking the way we did our day-to-day business, it is now so commonplace that there's a certain expectation that workers have technology skills when they walk into the door of a workplace. However, tech isn't the only thing that keeps changing. I think worker expectations have changed pretty dramatically, especially since the pandemic. To be frank, that's always been sort of an issue. I think workers have always expected more of what their employers could offer them. But now, as the burgeoning worker shortage is sort of upon us, I think it's drawn into stark contrast the challenges around creating a quality work environment and really addressing not only the needs of the business, but the needs of the workers as well. And I think coming forward in the future, the biggest place where we're going to see a change or a difference is going to be focused specifically around job quality.
Melinda, I want to say I concur with the job quality piece. In businesses we talk to on a regular basis, those businesses that are listening to their employees, that are listening to their candidates as they interview them and what their needs are really going to be the businesses that are succeeding and making that systematic change. This is something I think our kids or grandkids are going to be reading about 100 years from now. Yes, the pandemic and the public health crisis and all of that, but this is fundamentally going to change how we work, like the Industrial Revolution did. We went from, growing things to making things then. We went from rural populations to urban populations. And how we work now, I don't want to say the robots are coming to take our jobs, as we've been talking about for 20 years, but as Melinda said, the digital divide is really been shown, highlighted in this economy now.
And frankly, Brian, there's some jobs I want a robot to come and take, right? If a robot can come and clean my house for me, can help take my kids to school every day, there's things that I think would in many ways eliminate some of the pain points that human beings have in their day-to-day. But I think ultimately we're going to be working alongside robots in a way that I think folks never really expected. But my hope is that it reduces workplace injury, that it increases productivity, but also can hopefully mean a reinvestment of profit into human beings. And so I'd love to sort of see that, especially in occupations like healthcare, especially in places like manufacturing, where you see high worker comp claims.
I've been in the research that I've been doing for this conversation and around like AI and the growth of artificial intelligence. One of the things that folks say is while a robot may in fact put the widget together, right, to use the example, why we need humans and why humans will be so essential in the workforce is because of those human touches and qualities like empathy and compassion, creativity, imagination, on and on, where humans can work a problem in a way that a robot cannot, right? But I see some nodding heads. I didn't know if Michael or Robert would like to add.
Yeah, if I can speak, we work in the direct care workforce, and it's often posited that robots and artificial intelligence can eventually replace direct care workers. And we argue, one, it's probably pretty far away, but also it probably wouldn't work. I mean, direct care requires quite a bit of hands-on support, and it requires specifically relational skills like problem solving and conflict resolution. These workers provide quite a bit of support, including support that requires emotional intelligence and training. And so the idea that robots and artificial intelligence will replace direct care workers is just off, right? I would agree with Melinda's point that if we can think about technology and artificial intelligence in ways that would make their jobs easier and would improve the quality of services and supports for older adults and people with disabilities, then I think there's a lot of promise there. I do want to say that I think, the COVID-19 crisis in particular has shaped some of how we think about the future of work at this point in time. We just released a study last week with the University of California in San Francisco, and we looked at displaced workers during the first 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically occupations that were similar in entry-level requirements to direct care. And we asked, did those workers come back into direct care? And the answer was, no, that actually very few, an immeasurably small number of workers from any of those occupations entered or re-entered direct care following the pandemic. And for me, what that speaks to is this idea that more and more workers, if they have options, are turning down jobs that have been so persistently poor in quality and are also now even more dangerous, that it's going to shape, hopefully, how the sector responds and how policymakers respond. So I think the future of work is needing to think about those worker expectations, as Melinda mentioned.
Yeah.
I'd like to build on Robert's point there. I mean, when we talk about our world of supports to people with disabilities, we think about technology as, I agree, like Robert's right, that there's not going to be computers and robots coming in to do the work, but we can use technology to augment and support the way in which we support people to live their lives, particularly people with disabilities in our case. And there's some really robust examples of how we can help people to live more independently, taking away some of the pain points, for example, that Melinda was just talking about, but pain points of just daily living activities that many people struggle with on a day-to-day basis. But also the pandemic opens up these opportunities too. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation on Zoom rather than in a studio, so to speak, is part of that. And I think that also opens up possibilities for a whole new cadre of individuals who have traditionally had really significant challenges to entering the workforce, like people with disabilities themselves. We had an entire year or more of people who did meetings just like this and did them sitting at a desk or at a kitchen table with sweatpants on. And the fact that we could actually have a conversation or have this opportunity where if you are a wheelchair user or you don't have the use of your legs or you don't have legs at all, may not even be a factor that even comes to people's awareness or attention from both the employment perspective, but also the consumer-facing perspective as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so, I mean, we sort of are saying this, and actually it's a different response than I was expecting, but a follow-up question that I had for everybody was, do these changes really apply to every worker? Like, who has been excluded from some of these changes?
That's a really interesting question. I think there's there's different parts of it that apply to different sectors and occupations, and sort of the speed at which those changes are happening are different depending on the sector and the occupation. But if you look at the sort of massive changes happening in retail, or the massive changes that we're seeing happening in hospitality or tourism, again, the interfaces are only as comfortable as the customer is in terms of utilizing them. So if you've been to a hotel recently, I checked in at a hotel not that long ago. I never saw a person. We just sort of in online, and we had an automated key on our phone, and we sort of walked right into our room, right? I think as customers grow more comfortable with those types of technology interfaces, I think more and more people will be shifting to that. However, what I will say is I do think all workers now are going to require additional training throughout their careers, and that is not something that happened previously. And I'm sure, Ms. Cruz can sort of attest to this. More and more workers are coming in and are requiring extra skills, upskilling, retraining, folks who have already been in occupations for a long time. And I think this lifelong learning concept is something that in many ways is the future of workers, and something that we all are going to have to adapt to over time.
Yeah. So let me ask that. So job quality has changed within the past 10 plus years. Do you think job quality, or does the data show, is job quality on an upward or downward trend? And in what ways?
If I can start with that, it's funny about in 2003, PHI worked with an organization called Leading Age to develop a framework for the workforce, the direct care workforce, on job quality. And at the time, it had 9 elements and about 15 strategies. We just redid our framework, and it now has 5 pillars, but it has 29 strategies, which tells you sort of how much at least this sector has changed and how much our understanding has as a country about what constitutes a quality job, right? Unfortunately, when you look at some of those measures of job quality among direct care workers, not much has changed since that framework was first introduced in 2003. We monitored, for example, wages and compensation for direct care workers. In the last 10 years, it's improved by about 20 to 30 cents adjusted for inflation, right? And when you look at training, certainly the requirements have improved, but when you look at the training infrastructure, the resources, the programs, the methods of sort, it's still in need of much, much attention. So I think our understanding has improved, but I'm not sure the actual job quality has improved, at least in this sector.
I just want to say, I think what Robert says is 100% right. How we're talking about quality. We're talking about the changes and the quality that needs to happen, but it's moving very slowly. And, it kind of goes back to that conversation that we all had during the beginning of the pandemic of the essential versus non-essential worker, right? And folks that we were calling essential workers at the time were the ones who probably had the lowest job quality, prior, during, and now as well. So you can't be, in my mind, considered essential and not have a quality job. And I think society-wise, we need to really take a look at that and see, where do we put our emphasis on those that are taking care of our most vulnerable, those that are providing services to us on a daily basis that we really need. And we need to really compensate financially, but also compensate in terms of noting and making sure they realize that they are valued in our lives.
Yeah, when it comes to our world of supports to people with disabilities, I think anyone all in the caregiving professions, these are really jobs that have become devalued and disrespected, quite frankly, over the past several decades. I think that's a societal challenge that we have here. And what once were jobs that required a higher education and essentially have been now relegated to minimum wage work, while simultaneously becoming more challenging and difficult and risky, both personally and otherwise. And as these jobs have become lower paying, And the people who take these jobs have become disproportionately Black and brown people, and even more disproportionately women. 75% at least of the people we see in the caregiving profession in our field were women. It's hard to think that this is not part of, quite frankly, a governmental failure to sufficiently fund the services and supports that are part of this world, that are the government's responsibility, with competitive wages, and that's not part of the institutional racism and the bias that our country is now really kind of trying to wrestle with right now. What I think we've recently come to realize or recognize is that this type of failure is in funding for these types of supports for these populations of people and the people who do the work is really, there's some intentionality around it, quite frankly, and it's really kind of I would actually characterize it as a systemic exploitation of the people who do this work.
If I may add to this, I think that if the job quality had improved, we probably wouldn't have so many openings today. I think that with women, we know that during the pandemic, many women were forced out of work. Women, generally speaking, are the ones that have to stay home when their children are sick. Women, generally speaking, are the ones that care for their elderly parents. So it hasn't changed. What have we done? What has society done to support the woman in the workforce so that she can continue to work and care for the children and care for her elderly parents? So I think this is an area that this country as a whole really needs to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing to support? The USA used to be number one in women in the workforce. I just heard a study this week that we are number 6 among 7 industrialized nations. That's a problem. So I think we really, it hasn't improved. And we see people, we're seeing a lot of movement around jobs. And I think part of it is people looking for a better quality of work, a better quality of life. The pandemic has forced us to really think about our priorities with our families, our priorities in life. And so this country really needs to take a look at that.
Michelle, I also just want to mention that what we hear when we talk to businesses, and I think Brian can back me up on this, is employers who have paid attention to job quality aren't having trouble recruiting. Employers who have not paid attention to job quality cannot find workers. And they're constantly asking us for the silver bullet. And the silver bullet it's not because people don't want to go to work. It's not because people are uninterested in that type of sector. If you've got a good job and people know that it's a great place to work, you will have no trouble hiring. And people vote with their feet. And I think that's what we're starting to recognize. This great job shift is people voting with their feet.
And it's not all about money, I guess. I mean, we've talked a little bit about money and obviously, poverty wages and things like that. But, there is a business, a manufacturing business here in the capital region who has over the last 18 months hired 100 new folks and they have lost 12. Now, any company would love to have those retention stats. They pay average wages, I'll say. There is another manufacturing firm hiring for the same skill set, probably 10 miles down the road, that pays $10 more an hour, and they cannot find employees. And it all comes back to, how is the value of work? How are you treating your human capital that are in your business? Are they humans or are they just machines?
Yeah, and that's, again, just doing research for this conversation, folks, particularly those who might work in that sector that we're calling the low skill, but in the pandemic really became the essential worker, right? Those jobs, people in that workforce were saying that it is not the money that they're looking for. It is flexibility, that creates a quality of life that you were just saying, Dr. Cruz, right? It gives that flexibility that people need and deserve. But it is not. It's not the money. That's number one.
So Michelle, we did a focus group of about 40, 18 to 24-year-olds recently. They were unemployed, underemployed individuals. And we were asking the question, what do you want in a career? What are you looking for, in terms of your quality of life from a workforce development standpoint? And wages were number 6 on that list. The number one thing that they're looking for is a stable, secure job that's going to allow them the flexibility in life and regular scheduling. So they know that they don't have to wait until Sunday night to find out what days and hours they're working that week.
So let's watch this rolling clip from PBS Future of Work around domestic workers in the U.S.
The fastest growing sector of the low-income economy is domestic work, cleaning, and home, child, and health care.
I clean 2 houses a day, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. Sometimes I do small jobs beside the cleaning just to survive, My name is Adelaide Temba. I came to America in 2008 from Mozambique, and I'm house cleaning.
Like Tembe, many domestic workers are immigrants and people of color. They are often underpaid and have little or no job security.
The domestic workers are mostly women who work in our home. They are nannies, they are cleaners, caretakers, caregivers, therapists, cooks, all in one. Because we often say domestic workers do the work that makes all other work possible.
There are 2.5 million domestic workers in America. By 2030, that number is expected to double. As the U.S. population ages, domestic and in-home healthcare are forecast as areas of job growth. For many who lose their employment to automation and outsourcing, domestic work may be their most viable option.
Domestic work is in many ways the future of the economy. These are the jobs that are coming, and these are the jobs that are here to stay.
So in the pandemic, the unskilled worker became known as the essential worker. As we learned, their contributions to our workforce, it touches all of our lives. What impact has the pandemic had on the essential worker, professionally, financially?
In our microcosm of the world of people with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, there's about 100,000 workers in our state of New York, direct support professionals who do this work. And we really had to fight very hard during the early days of the pandemic just to get those individuals, these direct support professionals, recognized as essential for things like personal protective equipment, for even just the clearance to leave their home and go to their job. And their job involves supporting people with disabilities to get out of bed, use the toilet, transfer to a wheelchair, eat. I'm not sure what's more essential than eating, quite frankly. Yet so many of these individuals in these caring professions across the board really put, I think, the health and well-being of the people that they support above their own health and well-being and the health and well-being of their families. I mean, in the darkest days of the pandemic, some direct support professionals in our field literally moved in and slept on the floor and slept on the couch for weeks at a time to support people that was their job. So just to try to keep the chances of infection spread low for those individuals. But the fact that we as a state and a country, not only state and country didn't even think about or hadn't initially thought about this type of work as essential before the pandemic, but barely really even knows some of these jobs exist, really kind of begs the question about whether this label of essential, I think, is little more than an attempt to kind of continue the current status quo that, oh, well, these are low-skilled jobs. We're just going to continue to allow those who would be willing to take that work continue to do so, and some of that exploitation that I was speaking about earlier.
Educators, I think society realized the value of schools and education for the rest of society to work, right? However, going back to what Michael is saying, this our society still hasn't really thought about how we should be compensating and the quality of work that these individuals should have, right? So this is something that's left to a district by district basis. And this is the first time in a very long time that the federal government actually gives districts the amount of money that they have to, because, I think a lot of it was because so many schools were closed, right? And they wanted schools to be open so the rest of society could continue to function and open up.
One of the most frustrating, I think, aspects of the pandemic that we witnessed in the first few months was the use of hero language for direct care workers, not because their work isn't enormously valuable and deserves to be rendered heroic, right? It's that we know that it's a term only, right? That in fact it isn't substantiated by jobs that merit that status, and that it felt very offensive for workers who were putting their lives on the line for jobs that didn't really protect them in a variety of ways. We actually recently have started a study looking at the extent to which states around the country adopted hazard pay measures and paid leave measures to support direct care workers. And we'll release that report next summer, but not to spoil the findings, it turns out that not many states did it. And it didn't last for long, right? And what gets me about that general finding is that it's clear that states know what at least two major things that workers need, both to stay financially secure, to support older adults and people with disabilities, and to sustain the system. They just don't believe these workers deserve it outside of a crisis, right? And that is terrifying to me. I mean, it seems, and we are in a crisis in long-term care. Many states are reporting workforce shortages. People with disabilities at all ages are lacking the support they need, and workers aren't even entering the sector, as I mentioned earlier. So we need to move certainly to an essential framework that thinks about kind of the long-term policy supports that this workforce and other workforces need.
Thank you, Robert. Absolutely. And, around that, just a follow-up question, right? So as you said, we are in the midst of multiple crises, right? It's the pandemic, it's the financial crisis, it's the racial injustice crisis, right? Even as Dr. Cruz was saying, right, there's a crisis with the education. What do you all feel that these crises have done? Have they either brought to light things that were fault lines that were already there, or have they revealed some new things that we might not have known?
I mean, I know most of the folks who are on this call, and we've talked about all of these issues for decades. Like, we have not just suddenly realized that childcare is an issue. We've been talking about it for decades in conjunction with workforce and economic development. And I think, again, a lot of it was around, the moms will take care of that. Or, as we're sort of talking about, the structural racism in many of the occupations that are dominated by women and people of color, they're not going to stand up and ask for a raise. Well, everyone is standing up. They have been standing up asking for a raise. It's much harder to ignore it when suddenly people aren't getting care, or when suddenly people with disabilities don't have anyone to provide their medication, right? And so I think what we're starting to recognize is this exacerbation with the worker shortage is finally taking the issues that all of us have been talking about for a super long time, bringing them to the forefront. And the upside is, with the federal money, the ARPA money, there are resources in the state budget that the state just needs to allocate. and they need to allocate to this and make a choice that this is something they care about and they're going to invest in. And I think the challenge is often they invest in bricks and mortar. They don't invest in human beings. And I think for most of us, we believe that a huge portion of economic development are the human beings that you invest in. And so I think, again, a lot of this comes down to decisions that policymakers have to grapple with. But I think what they're missing is we've all been struggling through this on the ground for a really long time. And they just need to wake up and start to put the money where their words are, because they talk about it, they just don't invest in it.
And from a federal level standpoint on that same vein, Melinda, obviously we have the talk at the federal level of the infrastructure bill and the federal budget and whatnot. And people take the very narrow approach that infrastructure is roads and bridges. Well, infrastructure is human beings as well. Childcare. If we do not have enough affordable, available childcare slots for individuals, then they cannot go to work to build the bridges and roads that are needed.
And transportation. They gotta be able to get there.
Right. So, I think, it's important to take a look at and see that, as Melinda said, the human infrastructure is just as important as the bricks and mortar that we are investing in. And, Michael knows this, and I tell this story often. When I'm talking to businesses, I'm talking about economic development and DSPs as one and the same, because if I am a high-level research scientist and I'm trying to be attracted to a company in a region, but I have a disabled brother that needs to be taken care of, and those folks are not available in the region I'm going to be moving to, I'm not going to move there, so that stymies economic development. So I think we all have a piece in the economic development world, and everything we do every day. Dr. Cruz knows this firsthand in terms of career and technical education. And I know we'll probably get into this, Michelle, a little bit later, but, just to get on my soapbox a little bit, we have to stop thinking that folks that aren't going right to college right away are the ones who are non-essential workers.
For this project, The Future of Work, right? This is work that you all do, but this is work that I've been trying to take a deep dive into. And there's time and time again, like I have a reminder on my computer, on my computer screen, just in case I should forget it, that while it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole of funding or initiatives or new things that are transpiring in terms of workforce development, if we're not remembering the human side and the human impact and involvement in every single one of these, and without the people, none of it matters, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much funding there is or how many wonderful initiatives there are. It's the people, right? It's that human capacity and the dignity of work, right? That's really important.
In our organization, if you go Google us, look up our the leading edge, that's our strategic plan. We have a little diagram, and we have people at the center, right? Because we're a service-oriented organization. We serve children, we serve adults, we serve districts, but we're a people business. And our core values frame that.
So let's, I think we'll segue on to education and experiential learning. Let's watch this quick clip that we have around apprenticeships in our area.
We like to crosswalk the skills and requirements of that particular apprenticeship with what we offer in a degree program. But especially in this economy, where everybody seems to be looking for skills. They may not look for degrees right now. They're looking for people who have skills. And that's definitely something that we can do as a community college to help the economy at large. You complete certain milestones, or after 6 months, there's an increment built in with a registered apprenticeship, and Department of Labor will tell you you have to have so much. So when you start as a first-year apprentice, you're going to be making X. Now, it depends on what apprentice you're going into. If you're going into one of the building trades and you're going to be a crane operator, you might start out at $30 an hour and end up making $80 an hour.
So how do we make sure education opportunities and experiential education, such as apprenticeships, are relative to the future workforce? How do we build that bridge?
I think, Brian talked a little bit about the importance of career technical education. We pride ourselves in the work that we do in preparing students for the workforce. We have approximately 14 different programs in different trades. And then we have a STEM high school that we just launched at the Hudson Valley Community College with 4 pathways. And we have Tech Valley High School that we do with Cap Region BOCES over at the CNSC Center in Albany. And working with a lot of businesses and partners. It's, as Brian said, not everybody is going to college, but we have amazing opportunities for students where they can gain skills and certifications, and they can become fully employed upon graduating from high school and gain a very well-paying job, $50,000, $60,000 job for an 18-year-old. That's pretty good. And one of the things that I've been pushing for a very long time in our BOCES is to have students who have special needs also have access to career and technical education. I'm very proud to say that approximately 40% of our students in career technical education have IEPs and are graduating and receiving the skills to enter the workforce. So it's because it's experiential learning, hands-on, they succeed. So we're very proud of being able to be a pipeline into the workforce in the capital region and continue to build partnerships to do so.
As an example of this, we are working collaboratively, with the SUNY system to develop and expand a DSP apprenticeship program with SUNY Schenectady kind of as the lead for both the healthcare and our world and healthcare related apprenticeships, and working with organizations like Schenectady ARC right in our region to talk about and work on these types of things. And we're also working alongside the Capital Region BOCES toward the development of a DSP curriculum that will effectively create a pipeline of people for this profession and others, whereby the individuals that are completing the curriculum will essentially have the hands-on experience with the job to be able to be work ready as soon as they are done, as right on day one. It is, these are the types of innovative approaches I think we're going to need to be thinking about, especially for these types of positions in the caring professions and others that have been devalued and whatnot, as we've been talking about.
That pipeline is such an essential piece. We had a community conversation around the education to workforce pipeline, equity and access, and the need for not only to empower an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old to consider a career, but an adult learner who maybe never considered the pipeline or had an opportunity to enter the pipeline, but is now as a 40-something-year-old. Or is doing reskilling or upskilling or changing their career, but that they can also see that they can actually have a career in a certain field, right? It's not just something they enter and leave, but there is support and development and professional development, and they can gain credentials and they can make a good salary, and there's flexibility available to them, and it's like that. All of that is so needed, and it's not only, as you all know, it's not only the 18-year-old, but it's the 18-year-old and the adult learner, where it's so important that they have these opportunities.
What you're seeing, Michelle, is us moving the education and workforce system so that the career pathways line up with the educational pathways, that there are multiple on and off ramps for individuals on both that can cross over. And, us back to societal changes that needed. We need to get out of our heads that you go to school between the ages of 4 and 21 and then you're done. Because again, those multiple on and off ramps happen in life for everyone. And, what Dr. Cruz and Michael also touched on with the experiential learning piece is the reason they're being successful is they're being driven by business. Businesses are coming to our educators and saying, these are the needs we have. Our educators and our education system are the experts on the curriculum development side, and they're saying, okay, let's create a curriculum that matches up to what the skill sets that you need your employees to have. And bringing back to the classroom, teacher, why am I learning this? Well, you're doing it hands-on to know why you're learning this. So there is that connection that's happening.
I'm going to say, I think one thing that I hope we get away from in the future of work is that we stop talking about the pathways and we start talking about the job. If you want to be a computer coder, you can get there 5 different ways, right? And you have to be able to be on a pathway that best meets you where you're at this moment. My husband changed careers during the pandemic. He was, a carpenter, tradesperson, and moved into computer coding because it allowed him to work from home, allowed him to be more engaged in sort of childcare. Again, when we think about this, he's in his 40s. He went through a job training program, has the potential now to go into an apprenticeship program. If he had to go back for a 2-year degree, I don't think he would do it. Right. And so I think if we really think about the types of jobs that are being created and talk about the jobs and then help, again, in the workforce system, direct people best on the pathway that helps them get to the end goal that they have, I think we'll be much better off than just talking about pathways, because ultimately, the end goal is what we're trying to get to here.
I think in direct care, we would start with focusing on requirements. Too often, requirements for these workers varies by state, it varies by occupation, it varies by employer. And we would ask for requirements that are rooted in core competencies and less on duration or number of hours. And unfortunately, that's not the case right now. The other piece that I'll point out is that we have seen a trend in direct care move towards virtual training, more and more away from in-person training or even hybrid training. And while technology, I think, can play a big role in training workers, we have a lot of questions about the efficacy of those trainings. Does it impart the kinds of skills, knowledge, and confidence that adult learners who enter direct care often need? And how often are virtual trainings even evaluated for that? We see oftentimes trainings are evaluated for how satisfied somebody is, but not whether or not they had the knowledge and skills 6 months later. And certainly not how the consumer feels about how that service was delivered, right? So I hope that, we rethink the training infrastructure, the requirements, the methods, and the evaluation as we think about what these workers need to know. Yeah.
And I think for the business community, the more that you can invest in on-the-job training and sort of utilize the resources that you can get through BOCES, that you can get through the local workforce system, to actually upskill workers, you're also sort of in some ways supporting your bottom line, because many of those workers are subsidized while they're in training. So people are getting paid while they're being trained. And for us, that seems to be the secret sauce. It helps businesses sort of meet their job shortage numbers, their labor shortage issue, but also someone's getting the tactile skills that they need right there on the job. And so again, I really encourage, especially if there's any employers watching this, to reach out to Brian, reach out to Dr. Cruz. There are ways that you can get in many ways, a subsidized employee as part of these programs.
The micro-credentials, experiential learning, the apprenticeships, both the time-tested and the new IRAP, is that the right acronym for apprenticeships? All of this sounds so great. Sometimes I think to myself, I wish I had known about this when I was, younger, or at least in that phase where I was deciding what to do with my life. And yet, when you go and look at a job and a job description and you're going to apply for a job, the qualifications or the required degree piece, right? And it's there on almost every position, really seems to say, like, yet, so that out there in the education world, or some of the businesses are really developing this new way of seeing things, and yet when it comes to job postings, it really does seem like the old, or the traditional way of which people are hired. Do you have the degree? Because it's the paper that we're looking for, right? So how do we bridge that gap between, what we're saying is important out there in terms of micro-credentials, apprenticeships, and so on, but then when it comes to the person looking for a job, they already feel excluded because they're like, well, I don't have it. I don't have that degree.
So after 2009, the number of jobs that were, quote, created were on your lower end. And 2009 also allowed human resource departments to essentially use technology to help screen out. And I use that term specifically to screen out applicants. They had more applicants than they needed. An easy way to screen out an applicant is, do you have the degree? Instead of actually looking, as Robert talks about, the competency-based model, it's easy to say, do you have that piece of paper for this job? But I'll also say this on the other side of that. I had a previous short term in newspaper advertising and digital advertising a while ago. And I remember when I first started at the job, there were some classified ads that were being placed, and they had all these great qualifications they needed for these jobs, and I didn't understand it. And I said to a couple of the businesses that they were placing them, and like, are you really going to find somebody with that skill, with all that education you're looking for? And they laughed at me and they said, no, of course not. But this is an easy way for us to screen folks out, but then also make it look like we only hire the best of the best at our organization. So it's an advertisement for how great of a workforce we have here to my competition. So, we talk to businesses all day long, and we hear very often, I need folks that have these specific skills, but I will train them on the rest. So the conversation then gets flipped is, then why does your job description say this? So it goes back to, we always did this way. We're going to continue to doing things this way until it just doesn't work anymore. And honestly, we're at the point where it doesn't work anymore. And businesses every day are seeing more and more, I need help rewriting my job descriptions because it doesn't match the folks I'm getting.
And then there's the other perspective where you need that paper because it's connected to certifications, licenses. We all know New York State is highly regulated. And so there's that piece as well.
I would like to sort of just underscore what Brian is saying. And this is, I think, again, thinking about the future of work, my concern about AI and using AI to pre-screen applications and the potential, again, to intentionally or unintentionally screen out candidates who have disabilities, candidates who've gone to community college, candidates who have names that don't look like names that employer would particularly like to bring into their workplace, right? This is an important piece that I think we all have to be really hyper aware of, but also a recognition that just because a business says that they skill-based hire doesn't mean that in practice that's what they're doing. And so again, that's why that ongoing coordination and communication with the business community is so essential.
The workforce and the workplace is in a moment of change or potential change. What are some best practices being adapted? What are some examples of ways employers are investing in their workers, leading to quality jobs?
A lot of it is, and I was just in a session this morning with one of our chambers of commerce, and a lot of it's boiling down to listening to your workforce, listening to your folks. There's a business in our area that is growing very quickly. It's also another manufacturing business, and their workforce really did not want to do a second shift. They didn't want to have a second shift and have other folks coming in and whatnot. So they sat down with the owners and they essentially said, okay, what if we do this? We give folks an option to work regular, straight 5-8 hour days. Some folks can work 4 10-hour days. Some folks can work 3 12-hour days. Overtime is available on the days you're not working if you want to work, but you're going to make your schedule and we're going to fit into that. And it's been working wonderfully for them. Production has gone up. They've met the needs that they would have easily met on a second shift doing the same thing, but listening to the workforce and what their needs are. And I think those businesses that are doing that are the ones that are going to really move the needle on what the needs are of folks.
If I can build on that, I mean, I think, I would take it a step further and say that we've seen a lot of success among employers who also position workers as experts and help influence decisions for their organizations in policy and practice, both their internal operations, but also their external services. And being able to feel that you have an ability to influence the business decisions of your employer, I think is a big part of success. The two items I would add is one, I think it's important, and we've seen this among high road employers in the direct care sector, to really audit your organization for various measures of job quality. To what extent, are people being paid enough? What about training, advancement? To what extent are workers centered in the philosophy and the documents and the mission of an organization? There's a wide range of strategies. I mentioned the 29 strategies of a quality direct care job. And I think good employers audit and build on that framework to really create a holistic, equitable organization. And I think increasingly in direct care, employers are recognizing that workers have a variety of needs and aspirations that sometimes cannot be met on the job, and requires community-based organizations or others in the field who can help them with childcare supports, transportation. We saw an incredible employer in New Mexico that trains immigrants in direct care, and as part of the training, helps them navigate the immigration system, which is very complicated, especially on the border. And so I think the more employers see their workers as leading whole lives and working with communities to help fulfill those needs, I think they'll be more successful.
So, what are some policy approaches that hold promise that address job quality challenges?
So one that we're actually working on right now, which I've talked to so many folks about, is around income disregards. I think one of the things that we're recognizing, and I'm sure Robert can attest to this, is many workers who are coming out of training and going into, in many ways, poverty wages, are actually utilizing the public assistance roles in order to be able to make ends meet. And what it typically means is if you suddenly earn $1 or more an hour, or $2 more an hour, suddenly you're unable to get the food stamps or able to get the housing assistance that's so necessary for you to be able to survive. And so we believe really strongly that there should be income disregards that are put in place to allow for low income New Yorkers who are going to work doing all the right things in training, that they get a 6-month disregard so that they're able to sort of enter into the workforce and start to save some money, and more importantly, continue to be able to get to and from work every day. And so again, I think part of this is a reminder we have to figure out who the people are that we're trying to move into the workforce, and then sort of figure out how to meet their needs so that they can go to work and stay employed. As Brian is saying, sometimes it's not just about getting someone the job, it's making sure that they can stay in the job, and we can provide those wraparound supports for a period of time. And so again, I think part of this is bending public policy to again meet worker needs, which ultimately is what's meeting the needs of the employers across the community.
Thank you. Yeah, anyone else?
We would certainly argue for at least two things. One is making sure that we integrate job quality measures into the health and long-term care system and state and federal policy when employers are being hired, are being funded to deliver services and supports, that they're not just tracking quality and services and supports, but but also job quality, like job satisfaction, turnover, and so on. And the other is that we would argue for, at the federal level, a national strategy on improving the direct care job. Congress a few years ago passed a strategy for family caregiving, and they brought together a broad network of stakeholders to develop that strategy and are now implementing it. And we think that the same is needed for the direct care workforce and probably for other occupations that we've been describing today.
I think in education, we need proactive campaign to go into education, because we're not seeing the people come into education. That we need to couple with developing your own, creating your own programs to, and we've been fortunate. We have a program housed at UAlbany where we have a group of students interested in pathways in education. So developing your own, and then developing your own within your system. So, supporting those teaching assistants that would be interested in becoming teachers in the future. And we have a lot of examples of how, successful teaching assistants who become teachers in the system. And, it would be great to see some federal support for tuition and programs for educators to really help. We have a huge shortage right now, to really help close that gap in terms of the shortage in education, because we are, and that is across the state, across the nation, the education systems are suffering greatly from shortages in employees.
In our little world of disabilities, we still continue to actually struggle with the recognition of the job itself as a direct support professional. There's over 1 million direct support professionals in our world of disabilities specifically, yet there's not an actual recognition by the U.S. Department of Labor about it with a standard occupational code. It makes it very difficult to go and hire, so to speak, for those jobs. There are lots of commonalities with home health aides and other things like that. There are core components there, but some of that work itself is very nuanced, and the differences between doing the task for someone versus to help an individual gain skills or maintain skills that help them maintain a level of independence in their life. Those are nuances, and they're only learned over time. Which brings me to credentialing. That's one of the major pieces that we continue to push for here in New York at the New York level. A credential in direct support professionals that allows that's something that's transferable across providers, across different employers, but really is built from a core set of principles, core set of understandings about what it is to be a direct support professional, on which you can build over time some of that experience. It's on the job experience, and with that theoretically can come some pay increases at the same time, where you demonstrate greater levels of proficiency and competency in your job. And getting back to what is the world? How has the world changed since the pandemic conversation? As I think about the world of supporting people with disabilities, I expect that technology is going to be that, we're going to augment those direct supports with technology, but that's a whole new skill set to help build those skills to understand the basics of what it means to be a direct support professional, and then take that and do it in a remote fashion, which allows even greater levels of independence for people. That's a whole new set of skills that we're going to need to build over a period of time as the technology changes and as our ability to support people remotely changes and improves.
I think too, on the career exploration side, the state child labor laws are very antiquated. And when our education system is looking to partner with businesses, and we hear this from businesses often, there are a lot of activities that can't be done, in certain industries based on very antiquated child labor laws. If, Dr. Cruz wanted to set up a pre-apprenticeship program at GE Healthcare, for example, and on the manufacturing side, there's probably half of that facility that the youth can't enter into based on what the state child labor laws are. So I think, maybe some updating on that. Obviously, they're put in place to protect the workers 100%. We're not asking for that. But just how is an individual going to know if this is a field they want to go into if they can't actually experientially see it? On that, and I think that's key too. And then I also think too, as I had mentioned before, getting out of that paradigm of everyone has to go to college. One of the metrics on the school district state report cards is what percentage of your graduates are going directly to 2 or 4 year schools right out of high school. Obviously, school districts want that to be as high as possible because that's what society wants. But as was mentioned here today, 18-year-olds could be making $60,000, $65,000 a year directly out of high school with a great career. So we have to somehow work through, maybe from the state standpoint of, can we start highlighting individuals that are going into apprenticeship programs, that are going directly into skilled trades, that are going into employment opportunities right out of high school, and celebrate them as well. How many times do we have national signing days for college athletes that are going directly to college from high school? We need to have a national signing day for individuals that are going into the skilled trades, that are going into career tech ed programs post high school and whatnot, and celebrate those individuals just as much so we can destigmatize folks not going directly to college right away.
Michelle, Brian made me think of one more, which is really around how we develop quality jobs. I think one of the pieces we're really interested in is really thinking differently about the kinds of jobs we invest public money in terms of bringing to the state and growing in the state, and also having a public scorecard that sort of demonstrates how we're using the economic development resources to actually grow jobs that pay living wages. Over the last decade, the 10 fastest growing occupations, 9 out of those 10 paid less than 35 grand. And they make up over 2 million jobs in the state of New York. It's really hard to attract people to want to work here if the jobs don't pay particularly well, right? And so we think that there's a huge value in really thinking about a reframing of the state's economic development incentives, but also more importantly, keeping track of the number of quality jobs or jobs that pay above a regional median wage, so that we can start to demonstrate that New York is a great place to work. Not only a great place to live, but a great place to work because of the quality of jobs here.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Melinda. So thank you for joining us. WMHT would like to thank our panelists for their time and expertise and contributing both to our conversation. We'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about what the future of work looks like in our area, we invite you to explore the various stories we've been telling by visiting WMHT.org/future of work. Thank you.